What's good, guys? Fantasy Joe back here with some fantasy football content. Today, I am bringing you guys my early top 12 rankings for 2022 drafts. 1 year from now, basically a first round rankings. All my points per game, all that stuff, all these rankings are in half point PPR, just so everybody knows. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section down below. I respond as always. Let me know who should have been on the list, who should have been higher, who should have been lower, what you think in those comments. I'll let you guys know. But yeah, let's hop into this. So at one, this might come as a bit of a surprise. I'm in Jonathan Taylor here, but I think they're very close. I personally have Derrick Henry at my number one spot. The reason being he averaged 23 points per game in the 8 games that he played this year. And he was on pace for nearly 40 receptions. That's always been the Achilles heel for Derrick Henry as far as a fantasy running back, because he doesn't catch a lot of passes. Last year, he caught 19 passes in the entire season. This year, he had 18 receptions in his first 8 games, which gives him a much higher floor, prevents him from having some of those bust games he'd been known to have. If he can just be somewhat involved in the passing game, and he really, he's a talented, like once he gets the ball in his hands, he's obviously a talented runner. And another reason I have him at one is I think that the Titans' offense can improve. They weren't anything crazy this year. Julio Jones, A.J. Brown really didn't play very much together. They've both been banged up, and they're both currently injured. I think you get all those guys back healthy on offense. You get a healthy Taylor Lewan coming off of really, he was rough to start the year against the Cardinals, obviously, but you just, you get all those offensive linemen healthy. That Saffold's missed games. Um, I just think that their offense can really do some things points per game wise. And even though Derrick Henry won't have, he averaged 27.3 carries per game in the 8 games he played this year with that added reception work that he wasn't getting before. I don't think he'll be at quite those numbers because obviously I don't think that's sustainable. He was injured this year, but if the offense is scoring more touchdowns, getting more scoring opportunities, he doesn't need to be as heavily utilized. And if you look at his efficiency numbers, he's averaged over 5 yards per carry each of the previous 2 seasons. This year he's at 4.3. So I think if you back off the workload a tad, he could become more efficient as well. All right, number 2 is Jonathan Taylor. He's averaged 22.2 points per game this year. He's been awesome. He is also involved in the passing game, which was a question mark coming into this year with the Philip Rivers departing the offense. He has 36 receptions this year so far in 12 games, the exact same amount he had in 15 games last year. And has increased his yards per reception as well. The reason he's down here, honestly, is I'm just unsure about the offense around him. We don't know for sure if Carson Wentz is going to be back or not. I think he probably will be, just the way he's played recently. But Frank Wright's been in that building. He knows best as to whether to bring him back. Their offensive line is talented. You like to see them add a few more pieces on that offensive line. They'll just solidify it even more. Obviously, it's working for Jonathan Taylor. They have Quentin Nelson, who's a beast. Ryan Kelly, who's talented. Braden Smith at right tackle. But if they can find, if Eric Fisher can come in and be really solid for them, then they have their left tackle. But yeah, I would just say I just want some more offensive pieces there to take some of the pressure off of him. And I think his touchdown numbers overall will decrease a bit. That was the only reason I have him at 2. But I still, he could be 1 by the end of the season very easily. Him and Derrick Henry are neck and neck for me. They're on the same tier, along with our number 3 running back, Christian McCaffrey. He averaged 15.4 fantasy points per game this year, but that's a bit deceptive because when you take out the 2 games that he left early with injury, even including the game that he came back and wasn't utilized at the full Christian McCaffrey level because they were working him back in the offense, working him back from injury. Even if you include that game, he still is averaging 20.1 fantasy points per game. But the reason he's at 3, honestly, the injury history is concerning, and his quarterback position will matter. I want to see who the quarterback is going to be for the Carolina Panthers next year. Also, it's just anybody who's going to be used as heavily as Christian McCaffrey is going to get hurt. And, maybe we thought for a second he might be the outlier because he had that one full season was really just getting all the work himself. Had a season before that getting a heavy workload as well. But, it's a concern at this point. I'm in 2 seasons where he's left twice for injury this year, left multiple times with injury last year. It's concerning when you're using one of these top picks on one of these guys, but I still think Christian McCaffrey, when healthy, is just such a positional advantage in fantasy football. We know how much he can score. he's still worth a very high pick. And like I said, is in the same tier as Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, and himself, obviously. Which brings us to our number 4 player, Austin Ekeler. He's averaged 19.8 fantasy points per game this year. I would put him in the next tier of back, just one tier down at this point, but he's very close to being in that tier. 51 receptions in 11 games this season, on pace for nearly 80 receptions this year. Their offensive line has improved greatly. They have added Rashawn Slater, who's been good. They added the center for the Packers last year. I'm failing to recall his name right now. But he has been very good as well. One of the best centers in all of football. And you add, a great center and a great left tackle to your offensive line that was really poor last year. It really helps out. So yeah, I have him at 4. And you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert who can really sling it. Trust Austin Ekeler with the ball in the receiving game. He's going to be really solid every week. You can't really get games scripted out, like I said, because of his involvement in both the passing game and the running game. He's been utilized on the goal line this year. He really just checks every single box. And yeah, even if you're going against a tough rushing defense, it's just like he's going to get the ball in the backfield and be just fine. So you don't really worry about him matchup-wise either, which is very nice. 5, Cooper Kupp. He's averaged 21 points per game this year. He also leads the league for receivers in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Really remarkable how good he's been this year. I think he has 126 targets so far this year in 11 games, which is just ridiculous. 92 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns. If you get a chance to draft him, I would love it because you're basically getting like that running back spot at your wide receiver spot, which is a huge advantage. You can find other wide running backs to fill those other spots in round 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6, throughout the draft. But you get a wide receiver like Cooper Kupp, you can just plug in every week. Makes it easier to, lean on a bit of a weaker wide receiver too and stack running backs after that. Whole lot of draft strategy that goes into it, but Cooper Kupp's a stud. 6, Davante Adams, averaging 16.2 points per game this year, 10.5 targets per game. He's number 4 in fantasy points per game for wide receivers, despite low touchdown numbers, only having 5 this year. To put that into perspective, I think he had, I can't remember exactly how many touchdowns he had last year off the top of my head at the moment. But yeah, so he's number 4 in fantasy points per game this year, despite 5 touchdowns this season. He had 18 last year in 13.5 games, basically. Just shows you how safe of a pick he is overall. He could even be ahead of Cooper Kupp, honestly, by the time the draft season actually rolls around, just when you consider all those factors. And he's missed a game as well. And he's number 2 in the league in receiving yards. And I think, honestly, he's at 6. I think he's going to stick around in Green Bay. I think Rodgers will too. Obviously, a lot can change between now and next year, though. Number 7, Alvin Kamara. He's averaging 17.8 points per game this year, despite his lowest reception numbers ever. The reception numbers are concerning, but he's still, going to be well north of 60 receptions. But what will be interesting to see is the quarterback position, who they bring in for the Saints. I do think it'll probably be an outside hire. One of these teams is going to get Deshaun Watson, which will greatly change the fantasy landscape. It would be a thing to monitor. His offense could definitely improve. Michael Thomas hopefully back next year. Just really get some receivers, anyone to take some pressure off of him, improve that quarterback position. They've got a great offensive line there already that he can run behind. I think there's a lot of room for Alvin Kamara to move up, honestly, and I think you might be able to get him, north of your mid or of your first round. So keep an eye on him. 8, Dalvin Cook, averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game so far this year. Injuries are a concern with him. He's currently on missing games because of a hurt shoulder. Here's the thing I'll point out, though, about Dalvin Cook that people need to remember. He only has 4 touchdowns this year compared to 17 last year, but he is number 2 in carries inside the 5-yard line this year, meaning the touchdowns are going to bounce back. It's more of a mirage that he hasn't had them yet this year. I think he's going to be, a double-digit touchdown scorer guy who, again, you might be able to get north of that 6th pick in your drafts, jump all over that opportunity, just draft Alexander Madison, and then you've got, if he goes down, you plug him in and you're fine. Tyreek Hill, not a whole lot to talk about, honestly, with Tyreek Hill. He's just so good. He's averaging 17.3 points per game this year. He's the number 2 most targeted wide receiver in football. They're very stable position on offense. A lot of these teams, I have notes about what their offensive position is going to be like next year, quarterback position, wide receivers around them, offensive line, all kinds of things like that. Him, you really don't have to worry about much. Patrick Mahomes is going to be back. They have a solid offensive line, solid enough, and even he's going to be fine regardless. He's been dominant in fantasy every single year. He's been healthy, inside like the top 3. I'm pretty sure every year he's played a full season. So just draft Tyreek Hill in your first round. He's about as safe as it gets at wide receiver. Najee Harris at 10, averaging 15.8 points per game this year. His offensive line has been very poor, but they can improve. One thing, though, that you need to point out, the quarterback position, Big Ben likely not back next year. They could improve the position, or they could downgrade it. But the one thing I'll point out that is of note for Najee Harris, Big Ben, the reason that he's the most number 2 target running back in all of football is because Big Ben checks the ball down to him so much. I think he'll be utilizing the passing game regardless of who the quarterback is, but we could very easily see those numbers decline from his rookie year just because a different signal caller who's more competent and willing to push the ball a little bit more downfield, not check down as much. Just something to keep in mind with Najee, but he's looked phenomenal his rookie year. He's been able to stand up so far health-wise to an insane amount of volume, which you love for your fantasy running backs. And like I said, he's been heavily utilized in the passing game as well. Number 12, Leonard Fournette. This one might come as a surprise, but honestly, it's well deserved if you look at the numbers. Leonard Fournette's averaged 15.6 fantasy points per game so far this year. But if you look at his numbers since he took over as a starter for the Buccaneers in Week 4, he's averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game. And he's the 4th most targeted running back in football. It wasn't just that 4-touchdown game. He's been pretty dominant regardless. And yeah, you look about his offensive position as well. He plays running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have a great offensive line, a great quarterback, a great offense, great weapons around him, tons of scoring opportunities. And yeah, even if it's a tough matchup, when you're heavily targeted and you have a great offensive line, you feel good rolling Leonard Fournette out there any given week. The only thing that I think will be good to monitor is just his health situation the rest of the year. He's been a guy who struggled with health, but if he can stand up to injury the rest of the year, he looks great, honestly. Fitness level wise, he doesn't look overweight or anything, which he might have been struggled with a bit in the past. But yeah, I think Leonard Fournette will be a first-round pick in fantasy drafts next year. 12, Nick Chubb. He's averaging 15.9 fantasy points per game. There's a few people I considered here, honestly, just with knowing Kareem Hunt is going to be there again next year. He obviously steals some of that rushing work and some of that production, but Chubb is just so fantastic. He's averaged 5.8 yards per carry so far, which is highest in all of football this year for running backs. He has a great offensive line there in Cleveland. They've signed a bunch of extensions for most of their players, honestly, to keep them around. And the team may move on from Baker, which I think would be great for Nick Chubb. I don't think Baker's very good. I think if they moved on from him, he could do bigger and better things, that the offense was a little bit better. This brings us to the end of the video. If you've made it to this point in the video, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and if you have any questions or comments, think somebody should have made the list, somebody should have been off the list, let me know in those comments, and I'll let you know what I think. Any starts, sits, or anything like that you need for this year too, fire away. This has been Fantasy Joe. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.